In the winter of 1883, a rancher named Eli Cutter rode home through a killing blizzard to find a wounded Apache woman, half frozen by his cold hearth. What began as fear on both sides became something neither of them had ever expected, a bond forged in silence and snowbound weeks, tested by men who hunted her for the worst of reasons. When those men finally came, he faced the hardest choice of his life, and she would not let him face it alone. Stay with this story until the very end. And if it moves you, go ahead and like it and subscribe. It means more than you know. Now, let us go back to the beginning, to the mountains and the storm and the night that changed two lives. The Sangre de Cristo range had a way of turning on people without warning. Locals said the mountains did not hate you. They simply did not notice you, which was worse. The wind would shift. The clouds would pile up from the north, and by nightfall, the sky would be so full of snow, a man could lose his barn from 20 paces. Eli Cutter had seen 7 of those winters. He was 29 years old, owned 160 acres of high country pine and scrub grass on the eastern slope, 40 cattle, a quarter-horse mare named Sita, a dog that had wandered up one July and never left, and a cabin with 2 rooms and a chimney that drew crooked in wet weather. That was it. That was everything. He had not always been alone up there. 3 winters back, his wife Clara died of a fever that came on fast and took her in under a week. She had been carrying their first child. He buried them both on the south-facing slope, where the snow melted first, so she would get the sun early in spring. That was the thought that kept him from going completely hollow, that she got the sun early. After that, the winters got longer. The cabin got quieter. By the 3rd year, the quiet had settled into him like sediment in still water, and he no longer noticed it. He did his work, tended the cattle, rode to Mora for supplies every month or so, spoke to people when he had to, and came back up the mountain. He was not miserable. He was something more complicated. A man who had stopped expecting anything good to happen. He was 3 miles from the cabin when the storm hit. It came the way they always came, faster than reasonable. One moment, Sita was picking her way through light flurries, and the next, the wind slammed into them from the northwest, and the snow went horizontal. Eli tucked his chin to his chest and gave the mare her head. She knew the way home. He trusted her more than he trusted his own eyes in that kind of weather, which was lucky, because within half a mile he could not see the tree line at all. They came up on the cabin from the east, which was not the usual approach, and Eli almost missed it. The lamp was not lit. He had not expected it to be. There was no one to light it. But something stopped him as he slid out of the saddle. The snow around the door was disturbed. Not from wind. The pattern was wrong. Something had moved through it on foot. He stood in the storm for a moment, ice crystals building on his eyebrows, and he looked at those marks in the snow. Then he unholstered his revolver and pushed open the door. The cabin was dark and bitterly cold. The fire had been dead for some time. He could not see much. He reached for the lantern on the shelf near the door, struck a match, and held the light up. She was in the corner farthest from the door on the floor, pressed against the log wall. She was wrapped in a blanket that was not his, a heavy wool trade blanket gone stiff with cold and dried blood. Her eyes were open and fixed on him with the kind of stillness that could mean either great calm or great terror. She had a knife in her right hand, blade forward. He did not raise his revolver. He did not lower it either. For a long moment, neither of them moved. She was young, somewhere between 20 and 25, hard to say. She had the high cheekbones and dark, watchful eyes of the Jicarilla Apache, whose bands range through this part of the mountains. Her hair was loose and had ice in it. Her left arm was pressed against her side in a way that told him the wound under that blanket was not small. He put the revolver back in its holster. He did not know why, exactly. It was not a thought-out decision. It was something his gut made before his head could stop it. She was hurt and freezing, and the storm outside would kill an unwounded person inside of 2 hours. Whatever else she was a person. He said slowly, "I am going to build a fire." She did not understand the words, but she watched him cross to the fireplace without coming near her, and she did not throw the knife. He got the fire built in about 8 minutes. The flames caught and pushed heat into the room. He hung his coat near the door, filled the coffee pot, and sat down in the chair that faced the hearth, not her corner, and waited. After 20 minutes, she had stopped shivering as hard. He poured coffee into a tin mug and set it on the floor midway between them, then went back to his chair. She looked at the mug for a long time. Then she picked it up. He spent that first night in the chair. She did not move from her corner. In the morning, he woke to gray light and a storm still going strong, and she was watching him with the same still, measuring look as the night before. The wound was a long knife cut across her left side, deep enough that she had bled badly getting here, not deep enough to have reached anything vital. He put water onto heat, set rags and his needle and thread near the fire, and gestured at his own side, then hers, with a questioning look. She stared at him for a moment, then she nodded. He worked carefully. She made no sound at all, held the blanket in her fist, and stared at the far wall and breathed, and he closed the cut with 12 stitches in the firelight. "Good," he said uselessly when he was done. Over the next 2 days, he found out that the storm was not going to let up. The snow piled to the windowsill. He could not go anywhere, and neither could she, and so they lived in the 2-room cabin in a careful, watchful silence. Not comfortable, but not hostile either. Her name was Nahoa. He learned that on the second day when he pointed at himself and said, "Eli." And she looked at him for a moment and then said very precisely, "Nahoa." He repeated it. She corrected his pronunciation, not unkindly, and he tried again, and this time she gave a small, nearly invisible nod. She was Jicarilla Apache, from a band that had wintered in the high country near Cimarron for generations. The Jicarilla were mountain people who knew the Sangre de Cristo the way Eli knew his own 160 acres, every slope, every drainage, every place the wind came from. They traded baskets at Taos, woven from willow and sumac so tight they held water, and they had a ceremony in the fall called the relay race that invited the sun to return. Nahoa's mother had sung a traveling song she called Ndi Biati Naki, something like the 2-part song of the people's walking, sung when the band broke camp, so the land would know they were leaving peacefully and would welcome them back. Nahoa herself had been headed south toward Taos when they caught her. There were 4 of them. A man named Dolph Center ran a supply post near Rayado and a quieter business alongside it, buying and selling Apache captives, mostly women, along the route between Cimarron and Las Vegas. The territorial government was distracted. The army was stretched thin. Men like Center moved in the gaps. His men had ridden into Nahoa's winter camp at dawn. 7 people, 2 elders, 2 children, and in the chaos that followed, 3 of her band were killed. She had fought, taken the knife wound, and run into the mountains with nothing but the blanket in her hand. She had walked 2 days. She had found the cabin with Sita gone and the door unbarred, and she had gone in because she was close to dying, and inside was better than out. Eli got all of this across several evenings. She told it slowly in rough Spanish and Jicarilla words she translated as she went. He did not ask her to hurry. Outside, the storm battered the walls. The fire held steady. The dog lay between them on the floor. He had heard Center's name before once, in Mora. Nothing good attached to it. He thought about the people she had lost. He knew what that kind of loss did to a person. He just refilled her coffee when it ran low and let her talk at her own pace. One evening she asked him, carefully, why he lived alone. He told her about Clara, plainly without dressing it up. She listened the way he had listened to her, without rushing him, without looking away. When he finished, she was quiet, then said something in Jicarilla he could not follow. He shook his head. She thought about how to put it in Spanish. She is on the mountain, she said. She is not gone. He looked at her across the fire. He had not thought of it that way. He had thought of Clara as gone, simply gone, an absence. He turned the idea over the way you turn a stone you have just picked up, checking its weight. He got up and poured more coffee and sat back down, and neither of them spoke for a while. For the first time since Clara died, the quiet in the cabin felt different. Not hollow, just quiet. The days had a shape by then. Eli was up before dawn to tend the cattle, breaking ice on the water trough. Nahoa kept the fire. She started doing it on the third day without being asked. He came in from the barn one morning to find the fire built high and a pot already hot, and she had found his cornmeal and mixed something in a tin pan near the coals. It smelled better than anything he had cooked in 3 years. She moved carefully because of the stitches, but she moved. She was not a woman who could stay still. One afternoon she pointed to a gap in the chinking near the north wall where cold was coming through, looked at him in a way that clearly meant, "Did you know about that?" He shrugged. She found his bag of clay and packed the gap herself. He brought a second chair out from the back room. She raised an eyebrow. He set it by the fire and went back to what he was doing, and after a moment she sat down in it. They built a language out of whatever they had. Her Spanish was unsteady but usable. His was rougher but functional. What could not be said in either language they left alone and pointed at instead. She taught him Jicarilla words as they came up. Ku for fire, Zas for snow, Ju for the mountains. He taught her English when she asked, and she repeated each word back with a precision that told him she had always learned fast, because she'd always had to. On the 9th day the stitches came out. She announced it without preamble, produced a small knife she had kept hidden in her blanket. He had suspected a second one, and removed them with a steadiness that was plainly professional. When she was done, she examined the scar and gave one small nod of satisfaction. It was one of the most competent things he had ever seen a person do. She knew plants. She had gone through his stores in the first few days, naming things to herself. When his shoulder started aching from the cold, an old injury from a bucking horse, she came in one afternoon with dried willow bark she'd found in his supply sack, brewed it into a tea, and stood there until he drank it. It helped. He was not sure why that surprised him. The Jicarilla had lived in these mountains for a very long time before anyone else arrived with opinions about medicine. 3 weeks into it, a night came when she simply did not take the knife to bed. He noticed. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. But he noticed, and he thought it might have been the most meaningful thing that had happened in that cabin since Clara died. The snow stopped on the 22nd day. The silence was almost loud. The wind had been so constant that its absence woke Eli before dawn. He lay still for a moment, listening. Nothing. Then the small sounds, the fire, the dog's breathing, somewhere far off a branch settling under its snow load with a heavy crack. He got up and opened the door. The mountains blazed white under a sky so cold and clear it looked like blue glass. Every pine was loaded to breaking. The air cut straight through his coat when he breathed in. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Behind him, Nahoa came to stand beside him and looked out at what the storm had left. He did not know what she was thinking. He expected she was thinking about going south, about Taos, about the people she still had out there, if any. He was thinking about that too, and also about Center, and about the 4 men who had followed her into these mountains and who, unlike the storm, had not gone away. They came on the 3rd morning after the thaw, when the snow had settled enough for horses. Eli saw them from the tree line. He had been checking the fence above the north pasture, and from the rise he had a clear view down the slope. 4 riders, moving with the patience of men who had decided to stop being patient. He moved back through the trees and ran through his options fast. Run, leave the cattle and the cabin. Hide Nahoa and deny knowing her, which might buy an hour. Parlay, which would not work with men like Center, or stay. He got back 2 minutes ahead of them. He told Nahoa what he had seen. She moved to the back room without a word, and he heard the window go up and the soft drop of someone landing in snow. She was not running. She was positioning. He stepped out onto the step and waited. Center was a wide, red-faced man in a buffalo coat. He pulled up in the yard and looked down at Eli with the practiced confidence of a man who expected things to go his way. "Got a woman here?" he said. "No," Eli said. "Trail comes right to your door." "Storm moved a lot of trails around." Center looked at the cabin. He looked at Eli. "Mind if we take a look inside?" "I do mind," Eli said. Center made a small gesture, and the rider to his left started moving around toward the side of the cabin. Eli brought the Sharp's carbine up, and the rider stopped. "I am not asking you to leave," Eli said. "Stop right there." "Brave choice for a man alone," Center said. The shot came from the tree line above them, not at a man. At the frozen ground 4 feet in front of Center's horse. The horse shied hard, and 2 riders had their hands full all at once. Nahoa had pulled the Spencer carbine from the back room when she went out the window. Eli crossed the yard fast and put the barrel of the Sharps against Center's knee before the horse settled. "Call them off." Center looked down. Something moved behind his eyes. Calculation, mostly. He was not brave. He was a man who bet on numbers, and the numbers had just changed. "Stand down," he said. What followed was not heroic. It was practical. Eli told Center to go south and keep going. He told him Nahoa had seen his face and knew his name, and knew what happened at that winter camp, and that one letter to the Santa Fe paper would end a man's quiet business arrangement pretty fast. He said the letter was already written and held in Mora with instructions to send it if Eli did not appear in town within 6 weeks. None of that was true, but Center did not know that. The 4 riders went south. Eli watched until they were a mile out and still moving. Then he put his back against the cabin wall and let out a long breath. Nahoa came down from the trees, still carrying the Spencer. She stopped in front of him and looked him over the way. "You check a fence for damage." "Your arm," she said. He looked down. One of Center's men had gotten a shot off in the confusion. He had heard it, distantly, and it had cut across his upper left arm. Not deep but real, bleeding through his sleeve. He had been so focused on center he had not noticed. She took him inside, built the fire high, cleaned and wrapped the wound with the same efficiency she had brought to her own stitches, and made him sit down and drink something hot before she would look at him directly again. He sat in the chair by the fire with his bandaged arm and looked at the woman across from him. She had walked 2 days through a blizzard with a knife wound and nearly died on his floor. She had spent 3 weeks learning to trust a stranger. She had fired a rifle from a position she had picked herself at exactly the right moment, against 4 men who meant her serious harm. And she had held her nerve the whole time. He did not know how to say any of that, so he said nothing for a while. She refilled his mug and sat back down and looked at the fire, and the dog moved over and put its head on her knee the way it had started doing about a week in, and she rested one hand on its back, and the fire ticked and settled. "Where will you go?" he said eventually. She was quiet for a moment. "Taos. I have family there, an uncle." He nodded. Another quiet stretch. Outside, the mountains caught the last of the afternoon light and turned the color of copper. It happened every clear evening up here, that specific color, and he had seen it hundreds of times, and it never got smaller. "You could stay," he said, "if you wanted." He said it plainly. He was not good at dressing things up. She could have the back room, or go to Taos and come back, or do whatever she chose. He was saying the door was open, not that anything was required of her. She looked at him. He had spent 3 years in a cabin that was too quiet, and had made peace with that, or thought he had. But peace and genuinely wanting quiet were not the same thing. And somewhere in 22 snowbound days, and a shared fire, and a language built from 2 incomplete languages, and the sound of her voice speaking the traveling song her mother had taught her. Quietly one evening, probably not meaning for him to hear it, he had discovered the difference. The fire settled. The dog sighed. "I will go to Taos," she said. "I will tell my uncle what happened. I will see who is left." He nodded. That was right. That was what she needed to do. "And then," she said, "I will come back, if you're asking." He looked at her across the fire. "I am asking." She nodded once, the same way she had nodded after taking out those stitches, small and precise and final, the nod of a person who does not say things she does not mean. He reached across and set his hand, palm up, on the arm of her chair. Not asking for anything, just putting it there. She looked at it for a moment. Then she set her hand in his, and they sat like that in the firelight, with the mountains going copper outside, and the dog warm on the floor between them. And neither of them needed to say anything else. People talk about fear and hatred, like they are the natural state of things between people who don't know each other. Maybe that is true sometimes. But what Eli Cutter found in his cabin that December was something that neither of them would have believed possible 2 months earlier. That a stranger could become the person who changed everything. Not because it was easy, not because they were the same, but because they had been cold and afraid and honest about it. And they had chosen, each of them, to stay. The mountains did not notice, but the 2 people in that cabin did. If this story moved you at all, please like it and subscribe. There are more stories like this one coming, and every subscription helps us keep telling them. Thank you for watching till the end.